In the brutal winter of 1285, a suffocating black shadow completely devoured the northern horizon of Dai Viet. Prince Toghon, commanding 500,000 elite soldiers, unleashed his apocalyptic war machine upon the heavily fortified mountain outpost. The sheer physical weight of the invading vanguard caused the very earth to tremble beneath their devastating advance. High above the treacherous rocky gorges, the vastly outnumbered Dai Viet defenders braced for the ultimate incoming impact. Suddenly, the sky darkened as thousands of roaring, fiery projectiles rained down upon the ancient fortress walls. The air instantly choked with toxic black smoke and the deafening, mind-numbing roar of thousands of Mongol war horns. Enduring the relentless, multi-directional bombardment, the defending garrison suffered from profound exhaustion and critical, overwhelming starvation. Yet, old General Tran refused to let his front line crumble, desperately rallying his battered troops through the inferno.
Hold the position with your lives! The Commander-in-Chief needs time! Don't let them break through the city gates!
However, the overwhelming numbers of the ruthless invading horde were simply too massive to be completely stopped forever. The massive iron-reinforced wooden gates groaned in sheer agony as immense battering rams struck them with apocalyptic force. Deep within the central command pavilion, Supreme Commander Tran Hung Dao watched the crumbling front line with painful clarity. He realized that engaging in a suicidal last stand here would only annihilate his irreplaceable elite core military strength. Survival demanded a brutally calculated sacrifice, a tactical withdrawal to stretch the enemy's logistical supply lines to the breaking point.
Evacuate the stronghold immediately! Leave them nothing but ash and shadows! Let the flames consume their arrogant victory!
The incredibly complex retreat was executed as a flawless masterpiece of highly organized, highly disciplined military movement. Before departing, the soldiers systematically dismantled their own heavy defensive weapons to ensure the enemy gained absolutely no advantage. They then unleashed the ultimate scorched earth tactic, throwing their remaining torches into the vast, essential grain storage facilities. As the immense iron gates finally splintered and collapsed, the brutal Mongol vanguard eagerly surged into the ancient stronghold. Instead of terrified victims, they were greeted only by suffocating heat, raging firestorms, and heavily trapped lethal terrain. The devastating inferno rapidly consumed the vanguard, leaving the invaders' massive war machine violently choking on thick, suffocating ash. Realizing they had captured absolutely nothing but a hollow, burning shell, a wave of profound frustration swept through the horde. Watching this humiliating tactical delay from his distant hilltop, the arrogant Supreme Commander felt his absolute authority violently insulted.
Extinguish this pathetic fire! I want the head of their commander, even if we must march over burning embers!
Forced to obey the ruthless command, thousands of chained laborers were brutally driven into the raging, unstable ruins. Meanwhile, deep within the treacherous, winding mountain trails, the retreating defenders faced their own brutal battle for ultimate survival. The grueling evacuation marched tirelessly through the night, heavily burdened by extreme physical exhaustion and crippling, relentless starvation. The battle-scarred old general continuously walked among the struggling ranks to fiercely maintain their unbreakable, highly disciplined martial spirit.
Keep moving! Every step we take drains the enemy's strength. Our mountains will soon become their ultimate graveyard.
As dawn slowly broke, the true, terrifying scale of the enemy's massive logistical demand became brutally apparent to everyone. 500,000 invading soldiers and millions of war horses required an astronomical amount of daily sustenance to merely function effectively. By systematically burning the fortresses and leaving absolutely no local food, the brilliant Dai Viet tactician struck a deeply fatal blow. Without immediate resources, the immense physical weight of the invading vanguard slowly transformed into a paralyzing, completely disastrous logistical nightmare. Extreme frustration and deep psychological panic rapidly began to critically infect the minds of the supposedly invincible northern conquerors. The terrifying psychological warfare of the scorched earth tactic was actively proving far more lethal than any conventional battlefield clash. Deeply understanding this profound logistical crisis, the Supreme Commander of the invaders aggressively decided to establish a permanent forward operating base. Right in the center of the smoldering ruins, an incredibly massive, opulent command pavilion was hastily and arrogantly erected. Inside this dark, intimidating tent, the furious prince stared intensely at the highly detailed tactical map of Dai Viet territory. He painfully realized that the legendary enemy commander had masterfully slipped right through his fingers, fully preserving his core army. But as his cold eyes traced the winding blue rivers on the map, a profoundly sinister, calculating smile crossed his face. To completely sever the enemy's southern escape route, he immediately summoned his most ruthless naval commander.
Take your fastest warships, flank their retreat, cut off their supply lines, and drown their defiance.
Without a single moment of hesitation, the brutal general marched toward the vast, muddy riverbanks. Hidden beneath the thick, suffocating morning fog, an endlessly massive armada of heavy warships patiently waited. These colossal floating fortresses were meticulously designed to transport thousands of elite cavalry directly behind enemy lines. As the massive war horns echoed across the murky waters, the terrifying fleet finally began to move. The dark waters violently churned as thousands of heavy wooden oars struck the surface in perfect rhythm. Standing fiercely at the prow of his flagship, the heavily scarred commander meticulously scanned the southern horizon. His singular, obsessive mission was to trap the fleeing defenders between a brutal hammer and an anvil. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles southward, the agonizing reality of the tactical retreat heavily burdened the Dai Viet forces. Relentless torrential rains had transformed the incredibly narrow dirt roads into a devastatingly sticky, paralyzing trap. The profound physical toll was devastating, yet the brilliant tactician strictly refused to abandon his military discipline. This incredibly meticulous effort ensured the heavily armored northern cavalry remained completely bogged down in the mountains. He constantly redeployed his most elite rearguard units to systematically erase their muddy tracks and destroy bridges. However, the Supreme Commander remained intensely vigilant, knowing his ruthless northern counterpart would never simply surrender. Suddenly, a desperate, mud-covered scout frantically galloped through the exhausted ranks, carrying a deeply terrifying tactical report. The frantic rider aggressively threw himself off the exhausted horse, kneeling directly before the calm Supreme Commander.
Commander, a massive enemy fleet approaches from the east. They are moving to cut our southern retreat.
The situation instantly escalated from a grueling tactical withdrawal into a desperate, intensely chaotic race against absolute annihilation. If the massive enemy fleet successfully blocked the river delta, the entire defending army would be completely slaughtered. To prevent complete encirclement, the brilliant commander instantly decided to dangerously divide his severely depleted military forces. He commanded his most trusted veteran to firmly hold the treacherous rear against the pursuing northern cavalry.
Leave the northern wolves to me, Commander! I will drown them in this endless mud!
With the rear heavily secured, the main defending column launched a frantic, desperate march toward the eastern waterways. Every single agonizing step pushed their starving, battered bodies further past the ultimate limits of human endurance. Meanwhile, the colossal enemy armada aggressively navigated down the vast, swelling river without facing any initial resistance. Standing fiercely upon his heavily armed flagship, the ruthless naval conqueror sneered at the seemingly defenseless coastline. He aggressively ordered his massive crews to fully prepare their devastating ship-mounted siege weapons for an absolute slaughter. Just as the exhausted defending vanguard finally reached the muddy riverbanks, a deeply terrifying silhouette broke the horizon. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the incredibly massive floating fortress instantly threatened to completely shatter their fragile morale.
Form the shield wall! We will not let these arrogant invaders claim a single grain of our sand!
Driven by immense desperation, the heavily exhausted soldiers frantically established a massive makeshift defensive perimeter in the shallows. Spotting the pathetic defensive line, the brutal northern commander loudly signaled a completely merciless, full-scale amphibious assault. The colossal, heavily armored wooden hulls violently smashed into the shallow mudbanks with an absolutely deafening, earth-shattering crash. Instantly, hundreds of massive wooden ramps violently dropped from the towering ships directly onto the contested, chaotic beach. Hoping to fiercely break their terrifying momentum, the defending archers desperately unleashed a massive, synchronized volley of arrows. Tragically, the light projectiles simply bounced harmlessly off the incredibly thick, wet animal hides protecting the floating fortresses. Mocking their deeply feudal resistance, the ruthless naval commander arrogantly ordered his own elite marksmen to return fire. An unimaginably massive, terrifyingly dark cloud of heavy, armor-piercing shafts instantly completely eclipsed the fading, stormy sunlight. The highly lethal rain violently crashed into the fragile defensive line, causing immediate, absolute chaos across the muddy banks. Despite the devastating barrage, the highly disciplined defending shield wall miraculously held its fragile ground against the fierce storm. Watching the enemy aggressively commit to the extremely shallow landing, the brilliant Supreme Commander remained incredibly calm and meticulously calculating.
Their heavy armor is their ultimate tomb. Let them step into the mud, then we unleash the roaring fire.
Unaware of the deadly environmental trap, thousands of heavily armored northern infantrymen furiously charged down the massive wooden ramps. Instantly, their terrifying physical weight transformed from a massive tactical advantage into a completely fatal, overwhelmingly paralyzing muddy anchor. The deeply terrifying, seemingly unstoppable wave of northern steel violently crashed into a deeply humiliating, completely immobilized dead halt. Seizing this perfectly calculated moment of absolute tactical vulnerability, the hidden defending archers finally unleashed their devastating fiery counterattack. Thousands of blazing projectiles violently rained down upon the heavily exposed, deeply congested wooden decks of the colossal northern armada. Absolute panic immediately engulfed the massive floating fortresses as the deeply terrifying inferno rapidly spread across the tightly packed ships. Witnessing his supposedly invincible fleet bursting into devastating flames, the ruthless naval conqueror violently lost his completely arrogant composure.
Reverse the heavy oars! Cut the massive anchor lines! Get us out of this cursed burning mud instantly!
However, the incredibly massive, heavily armored wooden hulls were completely deeply stuck within the unforgiving, tremendously shallow muddy riverbed. Utilizing their incredibly light rattan armor, the highly agile defenders fiercely countercharged directly into the heavily chaotic, fiercely burning shallows. The incredibly brutal amphibious ambush rapidly collapsed into a completely humiliating, overwhelmingly devastating tactical slaughter for the arrogant invaders. Having successfully entirely shattered the deadly flanking maneuver, the brilliant Supreme Commander firmly secured the incredibly vital southern escape route. Meanwhile, far back in the deeply treacherous mountainous terrain, the heavily exhausted northern vanguard remained completely hopelessly immobilized. The fiercely loyal veteran general had thoroughly kept his unbreakable promise, brilliantly severely blocking the endlessly massive pursuing northern horde. The incredibly arrogant Supreme Conqueror was now completely trapped within the deeply highly toxic, thoroughly utterly scorched mountain ruins. He profoundly realized that his overwhelmingly massive physical strength was absolutely useless against this brilliantly executed, deeply punishing asymmetrical warfare. The brilliant tactical withdrawal had successfully saved the vital defending core, setting the ultimate stage for a devastating future counteroffensive. Safely navigating the treacherous waterways, the completely exhausted yet highly victorious defending army finally reached their massive southern stronghold. The brilliant Supreme Commander meticulously reorganized his deeply battered forces to prepare for the inevitable, brutal northern counteroffensive. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles northward, the overwhelmingly massive invading horde remained thoroughly trapped within the deeply toxic, completely scorched wasteland. Their catastrophic lack of immediate sustenance transformed the terrifying vanguard into a completely paralyzed, deeply demoralized mob of starving soldiers. Inside his dark, opulent pavilion, the intensely arrogant northern prince furiously paced like a deeply caged, highly dangerous, starving predator. He painfully realized that capturing the massive stone walls meant absolutely nothing without securing the highly vital, desperately needed grain. Driven to absolute madness by this deeply humiliating logistical nightmare, he violently summoned his highest-ranking frontline supply officers immediately.
Scour every single hidden village. If you return without grain, I will feed you to my starving war horses.
Desperate foraging parties aggressively dispersed into the deeply treacherous, heavily forested terrain, blindly searching for any surviving hidden civilian outposts. However, the brilliant defending tactician had heavily anticipated this extremely desperate, highly predictable foraging maneuver perfectly from the very beginning. The deeply terrifying, completely unseen resistance fighters instantly transformed the incredibly dense forests into a massively lethal, highly inescapable graveyard. Utilizing deeply familiar, highly complex hidden pathways, the highly agile defenders aggressively struck the heavy northern cavalry and vanished instantly. The heavily exhausted, profoundly starving northern invaders were systematically slaughtered without ever seeing the faces of their deeply terrifying executioners. When news of these catastrophic, deeply humiliating ambushes reached the completely ruined command base, the arrogant prince completely lost control. He finally understood that the seemingly cowardly retreat was actually a flawlessly executed, highly lethal master plan of total attrition. To make his catastrophic logistical nightmare infinitely worse, the deeply treacherous northern passes remained heavily blocked by the stubborn veteran. Without a completely steady flow of essential reinforcements, the terrifyingly massive northern war machine was violently rapidly rotting from within. Forced into an extremely desperate corner, the highly arrogant supreme conqueror violently decided to blindly gamble everything.
Leave this cursed ash behind. We march south immediately, or we all perish in this muddy grave.
But just as the deeply desperate vanguard mobilized, a heavily damaged, thoroughly terrifying messenger ship arrived from the eastern delta. The heavily scarred sailor collapsed violently before the furious supreme commander, trembling in sheer, unadulterated terror. He delivered the deeply catastrophic report of the completely annihilated northern armada in the eastern shallows. The supposedly invincible flanking maneuver had been utterly crushed by brilliantly calculated, highly lethal muddy traps. Instead of trapping the fleeing defenders, the ruthless naval conqueror had completely drowned his own colossal fleet.
Incompetent fools! 500,000 soldiers, and we are being slaughtered by shadows and burning mud!
His deeply terrifying roar echoed across the completely desolate ruins, heavily amplifying the utterly catastrophic morale collapse. The brilliant defending tactician had successfully outmaneuvered the vastly superior northern war machine at every single turn. By fiercely trading physical space for crucial time, he preserved the fiercely loyal heart of his resistance. The brutal invader now faced an incredibly agonizing, deeply impossible choice amidst his completely starving massive horde. To retreat meant absolute, incredibly humiliating disgrace before the immensely powerful, highly terrifying Northern Imperial throne. But to fiercely advance meant blindly marching his exhausted vanguard directly into an immensely lethal, unknown meat grinder.
We do not retreat! We march south, and we will burn their entire world to ash!
The deeply terrifying, completely crippled, colossal beast finally began to aggressively drag itself toward the southern trap. However, heavily concealed within the deeply misty southern jungles, the brilliant Supreme Commander was already silently waiting. The fiercely burning ashes of the northern frontier were merely the opening spark of an unimaginably catastrophic war.